Hello, a happy Halloween, Artist Forge family, wherever you are watching from. My name is Nicole York. I will be your host on today's The Artist Forge Live, and I will be joined by the wonderful, the talented Becca Bjorky, Bassam Sabah, Kat Ford Coates, and Matt Stagliano. Happy Halloween, y'all.
Happy Halloween.
Spooky hello to you.
And a spooky hello. How's everybody's weekend?
Good. I feel like I need a hat though.
I'll take mine off for you, Kat. How's that? Now you're not alone.
Oh, there we go. Oh. Nice.
I feel like I just passed it through StreamYard right to you.
It did kind of look that way.
I have a hat like that. I should have gotten it on. Anyways, too far in the other room.
I'm
That's all
actually
right.
really amazed it was sitting next to me on the couch. I'm like, I don't know how this got here, but here we are.
It works. It works. So weekends. How were weekends?
Netflix binging.
I
Like
respect that.
all day yesterday from 11 to 8 at night. I can't believe it.
What was your
Awesome.
favorite?
The Handmaid's Tale.
Ah,
Yeah, 1.5 seasons in like 2 days.
that'll capture you.
From the beginning?
No, just the last one and half of the previous one. To kind of remember what happened.
I got prepared for the ending, huh?
Yeah.
No, man.
Beautiful.
Haven't seen it.
Beautiful.
Haven't seen it.
I'm
Oh
telling
man, if you want to get real mad, go watch all of it.
I keep saying beautiful cinematography in there and color. Oh, it's unbelievable the stuff they do in there. Right.
I haven't heard a
No,
single person who watched it who was not, even if they weren't like huge fans of the show, who was not impressed by the filmmaking.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know what I watched last night? And I said this while watching it because this movie is my Braveheart, and you probably can guess what it is. But anyway, if the current, like the younger generations now, would just allow themselves to take in this movie, they would understand Gen X like without question at all times.
And the movie is drumroll.
You tell
Yeah.
me.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
No, what's that movie with?
Knowing me, take that into account.
I'm too young for this question.
You're gonna
I'm
laugh.
too young for this question.
I'm too old for this question.
That's what I was thinking.
The Crow.
Oh my God.
Oh, good call. Good call.
That's a
I
good
don't know
one.
why I
that
didn't
movie.
see that.
I've seen it hundreds of times. It's my favorite movie.
That crap.
That
But
is
have
a
you
good
ever
one.
had like any like question about nuance with, Gen X specifically, like the very stereotypical Gen X, like just watch The Crow and be like, oh, okay.
Now we get it.
I haven't seen it.
Oh,
Is it
you would
appropriate
love
for
it.
my children to watch?
Not the-
Not the little ones. I was probably far too young to see it when I first saw it.
I'm having that problem regularly where I'm like, oh, I watched this movie when I was like 7, and then I watch it again. I'm like, oh no, that explains so much.
Maybe your oldest, but probably not the
He
little.
doesn't want to watch movies. The middle one
Okay.
does.
Yeah. It's a good one.
1994 through and through.
It's a good one.
On
So, friends in the comments. So, hello, Divine.
Hey.
How are you? Glad to have you with us. If anybody else is joining us today, would love to have you say hi and let us know what are you Halloweening today? Are you costuming it up? Are you hanging out at home? Let us know what you got going on. So we got some movie binges happening. Becca, Matt, what about you guys? What did you do?
I worked on my house. Shocker. Getting it ready. Hardwood floors go in tomorrow. So it's this, oh my God, where do I put all this shit weekend? And that's exactly what it was. So just moving everything around. I didn't realize I could stuff as many things into closets as I did. Yeah, so excited. Getting this project almost done.
Yay, congratulations.
Thanks.
It's going to be so nice to have that good floor underneath your Tootsies.
It's gonna be nice to have a floor and a refrigerator and a sink and general hygiene.
We know you have a
things like that.
bathtub. So
I do have a bathtub. Not all I have. It's where I do my dishes. It's where I bathe.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing.
Yeah, that's my mom. So my mom, she only is just now 60. But when she was younger, my grandparents, they all lived in on the eastern side of Washington State, like in the middle of nowhere. So they didn't have electricity, they didn't have running water. She had to use a water pump. And the way that they would bathe is that the dirtiest kid went last, and you would cycle the kids through the wash basin, and then you'd have your leftover water, right? And so anytime somebody brings up, like you were mentioning, having to, you're washing yourself, you're washing your dishes, like, if you had to do that, there's actually a cycle that you can use.
I haven't gotten that right. And I wouldn't advise eating at my house for another couple of weeks.
Noted. So Divine's hanging out at home with friends. That is good to hear. That's a great way to spend Halloween. Amy, hello, Amy. Happy Halloween.
Hi, Amy.
Hey, Amy.
All right. Becca, what about you? How'd you spend your weekend?
Yesterday, I don't remember.
Perfect.
Saturday, took the kids to like a trunk or treat kind of thing at the lake near my house, and that was fun for the kids, but it was also like a crazy trip because there were thousands of people in this park, like all standing in line waiting for
at Lake Sacagawea.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it was wild, and like one of my kids like got a job hiring flyer in his bucket from one of like all the companies come out and like set up little booths, and that was weird. But yeah, also just movies and making art periodically. We've been doing zombies though. We've been on a zombie kick and a Hellboy kick for the last couple days.
I respect it. So Divine's wondering, Kat, what are you putting on for Halloween?
Terrifying as is.
You're looking at it. Halloween's kind of every day for me, so
I respect it. Oops, sorry. That's how I want to live my life. My kid does not understand it, but he's like, "You're gonna go to the store in your costume," and I was like, "Yeah, I want people to see all this. Have you seen me? I look amazing."
Every moment of my life has led me to this
For
right
real.
here.
Every Halloween, I'm like, "Yes, I have come home.
I must get Triscuits.
It's time to run all my errands that I've been saving up for days and days just so I can spend the entire day in public in this costume." Except in my head's going to be really hot. Anyway, it'll be perfect for this evening though, because we do. So I set up all my all my potions and skeletons and everything that's back here. I set out a table outside instead of like making kids come to the door. I set up a table and I make it my apothecary, and I have a little bed of coals with a cauldron, and that's where the candy goes. So I go out and I make the kids pull their candy out of the cauldron. Looks like it's, Anyway, it's just an excuse to continue my life of hedge witchery. I agree. Going to the store in a costume is the best. I love the looks that people give you. They're like, "Hmm?"
You have dry ice with it, Nicole? Or
No, because the kids have to be able to reach in and grab it. I probably will at some point like manufacture a way to have like steam coming out, like maybe a bowl inside of a bowl kind of thing. But I didn't have as much time this year because I spent all of October writing. So that is what I did with my weekend. I finished the book. I spent both days. I wrote both days and got the last 2 chapters done so that I would have today free. Thank you. It's at least the first part. So 5 books in 5 months. 1 is done, but I have no idea. I probably will get to book 3 and just completely fall apart. So we shall see.
I wrote an email to my mailing last night, and it took me far longer than it should have. So what you're doing is a Herculean effort. It's fantastic.
It's really just vomiting ideas onto paper. You can come back and fix them later, but the first part is just to be like, "Bleh," and get it all out there.
So I'm curious. I mean, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but what is the process? Do you just vomit ideas and then go back and put them in different order? Do you already have a plan in terms of the grand scheme of things and the big story, and then you just kind of do you create scenes as you go along, or do you see them like you do in photos and then write them in photography and write them?
So they're kind of tied together a little bit, actually. Divine saying he loves your costume, Becca.
Thank you.
Amazing.
This is the bedhead special.
I'm so jealous of. Anyway, you know how I feel about your hair. So What you do is essentially you have an idea for the book or for the series, and then I have a program that is called Plotter. And the idea is that you can look at the kind of general plot structure for the kind of book you're writing and then fill in chapter by chapter what is supposed to happen. So I know the broad overarching plot of all of the series, and then I go book by book and chapter by chapter and just write a quick little summary like, this is where they find the bad guy, this is where they fight the bad guy. And then I do a lot of like walking and thinking and walking and planning and walking, and sometimes a scene will come into my head, and so I'll flesh that out. Like I'll go to that chapter and say, okay, when they find the bad guy, this is what's going to happen. And sometimes it'll be just a few words that this is where they find the bad guy, and sometimes it will be like I'll have the idea very clearly, and so I'll be able to kind of bullet point out they're going to find the bad guy and fight underneath this tree, and she's going to hit him with a log and whatever. And then once it's time to actually start writing the story, since I know what's going to happen, it's like pushing play on a movie inside my head, and then I just record whatever I'm seeing happen in my head. So like the vision part of it is really similar to how I come up with photographs or like ideas for photographs. I just see it playing and write it instead.
And outside of third-party editors, how many times would you say would you edit a book before you actually say, hey, it's ready to go to an editor? Like, would you go back to it 10 times or like just in general? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So generally, I don't know if it's because of the way that I have taught myself to work, but my first drafts are usually really super clean. So I'll go through and I'll do like a broad developmental edit to make sure that everything fits together. And then I'll run everything through like Grammarly, and I have it's called Pro Writing Aid, and it's for longer works and it looks for other kinds of things. So I'll run it through both of those programs. It goes to beta readers, comes back to me with their feedback. I rewrite with their feedback in mind. It goes to another editor, and then I rewrite with their feedback in mind, and then it goes out after that. So probably 3 really solid passes. But because the first draft is pretty clean, it doesn't take me that long. Yeah. And I've explained to folks before, a lot of the time it's because I have thought through the story so many times in my head that I don't need a lot of time actually writing. I just have to get it out and then get it clean. So yeah, but that's it. Yeah. It's a whole different, very long process. But it's cool because you get to live in your own imaginary worlds with people you made up inside your head and talk to them. So that's pretty great.
And you don't have to go to a doctor for it if anyone notices.
No, I get paid to do it. So that's what makes it even better. I get paid to live in my own imaginary world. So there's something I wanted to ask you guys and talk to you about, because I responded to somebody over the last few days who said something I think as artists we probably all have heard. And I think there's 2 sides to this coin. I can imagine where you will come down on this, and where I think you probably know where I come down on this. But essentially what he said is, I don't think that everybody can be an artist. I think that there is value and that there are qualities that artists have that other people don't. And when artists, when the kind of bar is lowered for people to be able to get into the arts, the public's expectation for art gets lowered, and then we can't make a living anymore. And so he compared it to, he's a stained glass artist, and he said, if I meet somebody and they ask me what I do and I say I'm a stained glass artist, and they'll say something like, oh, my grandma did stained glass in one of her college courses. And he obviously doesn't like that comparison. Similar, I think, to the way a lot of photographers were feeling when the digital market really opened up and we had, moms with cameras. And people were like, you can't call yourself a real photographer. And of course, then people had phones and there was phone photography and they're not real, Anyway, so I thought that would be some really interesting discourse for this Monday. And I would love to hear what you guys think of that topic in general, but then also what our friends in the audience think, because I am almost positive that all of us have either said, thought, or encountered somebody who said or thought this at one point in time. Sometimes our opinions change. Sometimes, So I'm just curious to know where everybody is at. And Olga knew where I was going with this one. We complained back and forth about it for a while. So yeah, what do you guys think? Can everybody be an artist?
I feel like everybody is an artist.
Like whether they like it or not, you're just doing.
And well, I mean, we've had this conversation. I could see where Kat's coming from. Yeah, everybody is an artist in what they do.
Right. There's an art to anything, whether it's computer science, whether it's music,
Accounting,
whether it's painting, especially accounting.
The art. Yeah.
The art of accounting, right? But like,
but what is the definition of art? Right?
I mean, we've been
When you
fighting
say
over that for
Kat,
centuries, right?
Yeah, when you say that, Kat, it's because we can't limit ourselves to a certain definition of art. So can everybody be a award-winning painter? That's an artist. Well, maybe not. Right?
that's different than saying that someone is an artist.
Exactly. So an
Right,
artist,
like-
exactly.
So just so that we have just to throw it out there, the dictionary definition, which most of us know, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. The expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power.
Oh, so you mean accounting is out then?
Well, I think
I don't know. I would say accounting has some very, very
it's got some emotional power.
Emotional power. No, but for their visuals, I guess yeah, you can actually do compelling graphs to actually convince anybody of. Yeah, I mean, there is an art in everything.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever actually looked up the definition, like the dictionary definition of art. And that was, I mean, it was kind of ambiguous in its own right, what you just read. Like it said usually visually, but it left it open to interpretation.
Exactly.
Real definition lying in the purpose. So if you are very emotionally invested in whatever you do with your accounting, and you want it to inspire, or you are inspired to do it in its own way, does that then elevate it to art versus just drudgery?
I mean, it's a good question.
Mindset's everything.
Amy added in professional artists, so maybe bring, add that to, and of course, when he was explaining himself and his thought on that, I think he could have added that caveat to make it a little bit clearer that that's what he was talking about, because he was specifically contrasting everybody, low-level people, with where he believed himself to be and other professional artists to be, and this idea that when you come here, you bring us all down, and then it's harder for us to make a living, it dilutes the market, it does all these things, which I know anybody in the photography community has heard this discussion before, like, sure. the $50 photographers, the point-and-shoot photographers, the blah, 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 and everybody complained. So we could add that caveat to the conversation to bring it a little more to a point if we want.
You mean the word add professional in the qualification? Because
yes.
if you look at the definition of professional, right, it makes a reference to main paid occupation rather than a pastime. So does that mean that if you're an artist who does not make a living as an artist, that you're no longer an artist?
No, and that's not. So if I were to go back and relist what he said, he essentially said, I don't believe everybody can be an artist. Here's why. Because artists are special, and when people get access to the skills that artists possess and show up in the field, they then make it harder for real artists to make a living.
But that's like being upset at the $50 photographer. Like,
yeah,
you're not competing with them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And if you are, that's your problem.
Right.
Right. But you could hear that in any industry. I mean, if you look at the home renovations business, how many home renovations people say, all these people are getting into, Joe Blows are getting into home renovation. They're, renovation. They have a hammer, they have a screwdriver, and they think they can blah, 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 blah.
Flippers are showing up in the market.
My point is that's a weak argument. And I think it's just more of I don't know, some kind of superiority complex sometimes.
That's kind of what I like. The heart, I think, of the discussion comes down to, at least from my perspective, because I agree with Kat. If you are threatened by beginner baby artists who are at the bottom of the market, then you are either not as special as you think you are, or you are giving the wrong value proposition to your clients. Because if I do stained glass and 50 other people do stained glass, they're not devaluing me. I have to explain to people, like, they should be able to look at my work and decide that that is what they want because of the way I do it, not because it's stained glass. And we've talked about that before. Like, our photographs don't have meaning and power and value because they are ink on paper. They have meaning and value because of our vision and our perspective and the way that we communicate that, right? So
I feel like this is like the ultimate example of comparison being the thief of joy. Like, why do you need to care?
That's exactly where I was getting at. First and foremost, I just want to say one thing. Our color palette of coordination of costumes, chef's kiss.
We connect. We get it.
That was going to be my original question, which is, I think, asking, can everybody be an artist? It comes down to, why are you taking the question that way as an affront, right? It sounds like, in the way that it was being asked, it's like that there's levels of artists. And I agree with Kat that everybody can be. It's what's the definition of is, right? What does is mean? And I think it's the same kind of thing with this. Why are you getting offended or triggered by the fact that someone's calling themselves an artist? If you're a professional and they're a hobbyist or whatnot, why does it matter? And that, to me, is the bigger thing, right? Is when we hear that question, what is it that we feel, right? So rather than rushing into the answer of like, oh, an artist is this, and going into pat definitions, it's, what do we feel when we get asked that question? And what does that bring up in us? And that, to me, is the more interesting angle on a lot of this, because I don't know.
Ding, 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 ding.
yeah.
So I'll admit that I have been that asshole who looked at the, mom togs and judged them. Mind you, I was much younger, and I had absolutely had an ego. Nicole, what's your ladder?
The
Unconscious
ladder of
incompetence?
mastery.
Yeah, I think
Unconscious incompetence.
Mm-hmm. That's where I was at. And I felt like I was, I had a gift. People liked my art.
They're
People
not
wanted-
as artistic as you are.
Yeah.
Not real artists with your
Yeah.
eye. Yeah.
You're interested in photography. You don't understand my passion and how
I
deeply
am
I've
photography.
invested. I grew out of it. But I've been that asshole. Admittedly, I was like 16 years old, but I've been that person. And it was completely about my own insecurities.
Yep.
In existing
It
in
always
that world.
is, yeah.
Matt was saying, how does that make you feel? And seeing other people getting interested in things, I wasn't excited for them. I was afraid for myself.
Yes.
And I think as you climb that ladder, though, you get out of that. And I find now, like, it's exciting when people want to be artists. Like, I want to see more art. I want less accounting. Maybe beautiful accounting. I'll give it a minute, but I want more, more art. Whatever that means.
Right. And we got to be careful. Don't say creative accounting, because that's a different story.
I'll take
I
it
love
in the
that.
form of film. That I'll accept. Creative accounting in movies for the plot.
For the plot.
But
It's only
but
for the plot,
it's
guys.
wonderful to see people finding that joy in being creative versus being pushed into whatever box they don't get joy from, but feel like that's where they have to live. And it takes time to get to that place, though, I think.
I had a very similar conversation. I had breakfast with a buddy of mine. He's a business owner up here, runs a brewery, the other day. And we were sitting having breakfast and, talking about our phones as cameras and all that sort of stuff. And I was showing him some tricks of how to do some more compelling iPhone photos, right? I'm saying, you don't need to hire me. Like, here's how we can do some things if you know light and wide angle
Just
lenses.
shoot
and
yourself in the foot there, Matt. Yeah.
No, but what I saw was he kept saying things like, well, I'll never be the photographer that you are. And I'm like, that doesn't matter. Like, go out and explore and create and do these things. And so he's been sending me pictures of, he's like, I turned it upside down and used the wide angle lens like you told me, and you did this. And I saw that spark in him, and I'm like, that's what it's all about right there. Like, I don't care about the pictures, and he's not caring about being an artist, but he's in that mindset. He's in that mindset of creation. And it felt good to see that spark in someone, feel that, right? I'm not threatened by him, like, oh, fuck, now he's going to do iPhone photos and he's only going to charge $10. Like, not getting into that realm. But it was great to be on that same plane where everybody can create. And if I can be a conduit to help them get there, awesome. Like, that makes me as an artist feel better. Like, all right, if I can transfer some of my knowledge to somebody else, that too is being an artist. And I just think everybody's got different levels of it. So it's how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about that comparison, right? Being the thief of joy. Like, if I'm getting triggered by, no, I'm not going to share anything with him because then he's going to take away from my art, then I'm far too insecure to be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah,
That's an interesting point. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Just that you just said that he's not going to take away from my art. And I feel like in conversations similar to this, we've really talked about how personal art creation can be. And obviously there are some people like Bassam, I'm going to call you out because you got into it from the business side first, right? Which I find absolutely fascinating. But a lot of people, it's personal. We make art for ourselves. Yes, we may make art for money too, but it's still emotionally ours. And Matt, I think that puts a really excellent point on it that, maybe this person does go out and start building a business off taking iPhone photos, or maybe they go buy an SLR and do whatever, but it's never going to be yours. No matter how talented or technically fantastic it is never yours.
Yeah.
No matter what.
And I think that if you put two candles side by side and you light both candles, the second candle doesn't take light away from the first candle. They both just make the room brighter, right? Jeez. And having the feeling that if somebody else has a light, it dims mine is just, who wants to live with that inside here? If you can only be special, if you are the only one doing a thing, and if you can only make money, if you are the only one doing a thing, you are not in the right industry, homie. Like, you should not be here if that is what you think making money as an artist looks like. And at least from my experience, all of the top artists that I know, like the people who are killing it at the game, making a great living, loving what they do, they are the most generous, the most willing to share, the most excited and happy to lift up other artists and give them information on being in the field and being successful and all that kind of stuff. And that scarcity mindset, I mean, that will translate itself into every area of your life. And do you really want to live that way? Always afraid that somebody's going to show up to take away from you?
You get elevated by elevating people around you.
My hat is like slowly sinking.
I do think it's interesting that, one of the conversations that we've had like a million times here in other photo circles and so on and so forth is about pricing, because photographers specifically, because that's the majority of where I spend my time, but have issues with charging sustainable rates, because then there's rejection attached to it, and that must mean that they're bad or greedy or whatever, because their art is so personal to them, like they're being rejected as a human being, so they would rather not put a price on it at all. And that's like, not putting a price on it at all is absolutely a valid choice, right? Because you want, like, I'm like that with painting. Like, I don't sell paintings, I just paint for the sake of it. But at the same time, like, being able to evaluate as a business owner, like, and understand that you can put a whatever price tag you want, whether it's 150 million for a flippin' potato, right? Or, $400 for a portrait, or insert whatever numeric value you want to. The same argument could be said and given for both for and against. And that's really where it's fun for me, because it's like, well, I don't want to price myself so high because then I'm a bad person. But guess where the value's coming from? The value's coming from the fact that it is mine.
Yep.
You're not going to get it anywhere else. But it does not translate to me being a terrible person. if you decide that that is not your value. Yeah, we could go down value rabbit holes all day. Sorry.
No, it's great.
I
Go
had that
ahead, Matt.
I had that exact conversation with someone last night, Kat, about myself, about my own pricing, about where I'm at with certain things. And as I go into next year and start to raise my prices, right, there, it wells up all sorts of weirdness in me as I do that. And I like to be comfortable and I like to be liked. And I don't want to be not liked if I raise my prices, right? So that spun me into that whole self-value thing again. Right. And so it all ties into this conversation about what am I as an artist? What am I as a photographer? What am I as a professional? What am I as a human? Like all of these things, it really does make you question, or I don't say question, but look inward and validate or verify or even question and change some of the things that you're feeling. So yeah, what you said was really, really timely. I'm like, yep, going through it as we speak. Yep.
That actually brings up something that kind of ties into this conversation, and I would love to hear what everyone thinks about it, because this is where my mind has been a lot lately, particularly with the advent of AI. There used to be a time when your technical skill was the most important part of what you did. What I mean by that is not everybody had access to a camera, and those people who did, not all of them knew how to use it well, right? There was a time when a camera required training. You would need to go find a photographer who would teach you how to use a camera in order to be able to use it well. And you had to have wet plates, and you had to have there was a whole bunch of skills that went into this that you only could get in specialized locations. We have YouTube now. And we have ease of use now. So cameras are now easier to use than ever before. Oils are easier to get. You don't have to make your own. You don't have to go to somebody and learn how to make your own paints and control your own brushes. You can now watch a YouTube video, pop on down to Michael's, come home with some art supplies, and call yourself an artist. Yes. It's amazing, right?
I'm into it.
It's amazing. But that means that the value of what you do no longer purely resides in the skill that you have earned to do it, right? Because it used to be a master, you were 10 years in, you knew all of the techniques, so anything that was in your head, you could make it. Now we're at the point where we can learn skills faster than any humans that have ever lived on this planet before, because of how much access to technology and information we have, but also we have more time now, because we're not trying to scratch a living out of every single day. Most of us have some hours in the evening, that we can devote to whatever. We're not darning socks by candlelight so our kids, have warm feet, right? So
speak for yourself.
Right? You don't know my life. But we now have that. So skill has become the bare minimum now. If you want to go beyond just I can make a thing to I can make this much money off of a thing, you have to be bringing more to the table than just your technique. You have to be bringing vision. You have to be bringing perspective. You have to be bringing your ability to work with people. You have to be bringing insight. There must now be more than pure skill and technique. It has to be skill in the service of a vision, a message, right? A something else. And I think when people get trapped in this idea that, well, it took me 10 years to learn how to do stained glass, and you've only been doing it for 2, and how can you come on the scene and charge this much? Or I paid off all my student loans. How dare you get yours paid off? It's, in my mind, it's the same kind of mindset, right? Instead of being excited, like Becca mentioned, people can go become artists now, right away. You can go and do it. Maybe you won't make $1 million. Maybe you won't be a successful business, but so?
The thing I love about the fact that anybody can be an artist, and coming back to the original question, right, is that in the original person that was asking the question, there's the expectation subconsciously that whoever becomes an artist will be equal to them and then becomes a competitor, right? Instead, what happens when everybody becomes an artist is that we create this culture of good enough, and people create good enough art for the majority of the time. So now it transcends skill of how you separate yourself, right? Like you were just talking about. And once that market is saturated, how do you rise above it? Well, you create value, right? You create experience. And those are the things that now start to separate the artists from everybody else. So can everybody be an artist? Absolutely. But how do you differentiate yourself with value and with experience that doesn't rely on skill? And I think there is the huge differentiator. So you really nailed it that skill is kind of going away in every field. Lord knows I put plumbing in this house. I'm not a plumber, right?
Yeah.
But thanks, YouTube. So anybody can get that skill, but to do it with ease and efficiency and have that unconscious competence,
Right.
that's where we're trying to get to. And that's the differentiator for me, not whether or not someone calls themselves an artist. Do you have that unconscious competence that makes you a master at your craft?
Yeah, I think there's two elements that go along with this, with the technical skills, right? And one of them is resourcefulness, and the other one, more of a business term, like I'll add the word art to it, the art of integration, right? And I'll explain myself. So you would think that in today's world, with all these resources that are available to us, that people don't need to be resourceful to be successful. I think it's on the contrary, right? You need to be even more resourceful, because to weed out all the crap, to weed out what is actually going to differentiate you, as Matt said, how do you use all this information and resources that's available in a way that differentiates you and actually supports what you're trying to do and fits in with your personality and your purpose and so on. So resourcefulness is an element that's critical, I think, in today's world, in any world, but definitely in today's world. And the other one is the art of integration. And when I talk about integration, it's just how do you put something together, like an often call it an ecosystem around you to support whatever you do in a way that makes it viable, in a way that makes it sustainable. And if it's a business endeavor and you want to make money, in a way that allows you to do it and make money at it. So how do you integrate all the winning conditions that you need to have in place, the skill sets that you need to either have or kind of draw upon from people around you and resources around you, and then all the things you need to do, whether it's social media and whether it's this or that or copy or you name it. So obviously we can talk about a whole bunch of skill sets, but I think those two are critical.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were saying that, Bassam, there used to be a day where if you could be the only person in town, you'd be set. Like you could go hang a sign and you were the Cooper of that town.
Yeah.
And that's how you made your living. And
Right.
and now you're right. We need more than that. And even just my experience transferring my main income from photography to publishing has been, when I go to do market research, I can find lots of books that are selling beautifully and have great reviews and everything else, where at least from my perspective, the writing is mediocre. The writing is mediocre, the storytelling is mediocre.
Yeah.
But to somebody else, that was good enough. They read it and they loved it. And they happened to hit the right whatevers, maybe the right emotional cues, maybe they came at the right time in the market, maybe they had the right person share their story, whatever it was, they did something right in there. And if I want to be able to replicate that kind of success, I cannot stop at just writing a good story. I have to have more than that today, because it requires more than that today. I can't just show up and be the only author on the block anymore, right? So those days are long gone.
Yeah.
Believe me, it doesn't matter if you're the only photographer in town. Ask me how I know.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking it's interesting. With Asheville, like the city itself, we have about 90,000 people, and then in the county, about 250,000. And over the last 5 years, there have been more photographers like coming up and getting into that like sustainable pricing space, that like $1,000 to $3,000 range, somewhere in there. And, at the same time, like my pricing has elevated too. And one of my associates mentioned like, oh, well, I was talking to this inquiry, you know, but they're going to go with somebody else. And it's, you know, one of these other, you know, similarly organized photographers. And she was getting really kind of down on herself, like, oh, it sucks that you're not the only one here anymore. Because they were kind of riding on that reputation. And I was like, no, are you kidding? They're setting the stage to where like it's the norm. It's the norm to be an artist and not charge $4.33.
Yeah.
It's the norm now for like, this is a blessing. Don't be upset because that client went over to her. Like, thank her for having the balls to show up and charge sustainably.
True. And I think as long as there are people who gatekeep and try to keep people out of communities, that's when you become stagnant, because now there is no competition. There is no the rising tide that raises all ships, right? It's just me, and I can be comfortable keep doing. I can be comfortable continuing.
Nicole
We
is an author,
conjugate
everyone.
verbs. I can be comfortable doing the same old thing, instead of being forced to be, like Bassam was saying, resourceful and to integrate all of my knowledge. And also, like Becca said earlier, there's more art in the world. Why would that ever be a bad thing to you? Unless you're insecure.
Are you guys ready for Becca's anti-capitalist rant of the day?
Go
Yes!
off. I'm ready.
Okay. It's not that bad. But I
Lies.
feel
Really
like
good,
going into the arts, I mean, even just a couple decades back, where you would go to art school, which costs a pretty penny, and you'd have those resources to be able to afford a camera or afford those oil paints or whatever it is. There was a level of status and privilege that came with being a professional artist and having those resources and that access to that, or even just like, you know, the greater kind of fine art world in general. Who's out here spending millions of dollars on pieces of art? People with a certain level of status and privilege, and having that, you know, democratized, having that bar to entry lowered, I think is very threatening to people, not just because of, you know, the general insecurity about being an artist, but, you know, who is allowed to be speaking loudly and creatively in the world. And that's my short rant. But I don't know if you guys have experienced that, you know, or
Does
seen
one,
that.
but does one take away from the other, Becca?
I'm sorry.
The fact that it's democratized, does it take away from? Does it reduce that hierarchy, or does that hierarchy still exist? It's just wider.
I think we're in the process of the hierarchy, you know, changing. But I mean, there's still obviously differentiation between different aspects of the art world and different kind of levels to it, and, you know, who has access and who even is allowed to participate in certain spaces. That's a larger
But I
rant.
think that's also why, like, the celebration of those minorities, like coming into the space with success and vitality, like, is so prominent, right? Like, fuck yeah, like, celebrate the fact that, you know, this minority, whether it's woman or race associated or gender or whatever, like, coming into a space that has been predominantly just rich white people.
Yep.
Right. And yeah, like, that should be something that's on everybody's radar, especially when we're talking about like that status space. And then when we start talking about like the commercialization and, you know, even like the very, very kind of low level addressing is men and women in Hollywood, right? Like, two leading actor, actress, male is paid $80 gajillion million and she's paid like 20 grand, right? And then having those women step forward and demand, like, even with Friends, right, across the board, everybody was paid $1 million an episode based on those negotiations, nobody higher, nobody lesser. And being able to stand up and be proud of taking that status in a space that's predominantly, you know, covered up in privilege. Like, yeah.
And I think there's something also really deep there that's superhuman, in that probably somebody who worked really hard to gain a skill and fought their way into being able to do something for a living now sees themselves threatened by what they presume is lesser than what they do. And all of a sudden now people are valuing art, and they look at the lesser and they look at yours and don't see much of a difference. And then all of a sudden you feel not only threatened financially, because that is absolutely a possibility, but you feel threatened personally. I fought for this. I worked hard for this. So I cut my hands and I bled for this. And here's this person who shows up, and how dare they get in 5 minutes what I fought so hard for years to get.
Or in 5 words on AI.
But isn't that,
yeah.
at least for me as artists, isn't that what we've been fighting for? The ability to communicate through art without like a glass ceiling to stop us. But also, and here's the other thing, people who say this assume that they're not the low guy on the totem pole. Like, so here's what I mean. If I were to say only the best writers should be selling well, under the assumption that I'm one of the best writers, what happens when I find out that if you were to tally the talent of all of these authors, I'm in the bottom 10%? Well, bye for me, right? Because all of these arguments come from a place of assuming that the arguer is in the top. I don't want somebody to come in and threaten me where I have fought to get up here. Homie, you might be way down here and you don't know it. And if we really turned this into a meritocracy, half of us would fall out of the bottom. Because the very best people in the world, the people who that's all they think and do and breathe and obsess, and they give up their relationships and they give up their family ties and they destroy their lives for this one thing, at the end of the day, maybe the rest of us fall out of the bottom. So we should be really careful about saying only the best, most talented, most whatever should be allowed to do. Because if you were to put those things on a scale, you might not be as high up there as you think. And if the bar to entry still existed, I may never have made it in.
Well, and to define what that success is, right? Like, is it the sale of your work? Is it the emotional impact it has on a particular group of people? Is it just in the ability to be able to put it on the internet to say that it exists, right? Like, what does success look like? Because, I can kind of talk some smack about the guy and his photo of a potato that went for $150 million. But at the end of the day, like, hell yeah, you got $150 million for a photo. Kick ass. Why am I too expensive again? Right? Like,
yeah.
elevate, and figure out what success is.
So it basically comes down to personality traits and insecurities, and it's that person's going to be like that. That's gonna, of course, that person's going to be the same with anything in life, not just their status as an artist.
Right? Yeah, I mean, that's the danger, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the danger. And maybe the whole like real big takeaway from this conversation is, if you find that happening to you, give yourself a minute and take a step back and ask yourself where that's coming from. Because I won't lie and say that that's never a feeling that crops up that I have, because it absolutely does. If I'm doing market research and I go find an author or a book and I read the first part of the book and I'm thinking to myself, I write better than this. Why does this person have this and I have this? Whoa, wait a minute. Where is that coming from? Like, why are those thoughts showing up? And why have I built an expectation for myself after a year that I should be here? Like, I'm level 4. I am still climbing my way up. I don't have the right to assume that I'm going to be level 20 just because I should have it, or because for some reason in my head I think that I'm better. And who makes that standard anyway? Right. Who decides what better is?
No, but Nicole, even though you may not define better, you could be better. You probably are better.
Sure could.
But they've done what I said earlier. They've done what it takes to get them to where they are. They've built that. They've integrated a whole bunch of things that made them sell that book, whereas you haven't probably.
Sure.
Right? It's not a matter. It's like we always said. It's the quality that has to be. Fundamentally, there's got to be some quality there, but it doesn't have to be perfect for people to buy it.
Now, do you find that when you have that experience, Nicole, do you find that inspiring or
No.
motivating? Kind of like, no?
No. At those times, so I guess let me rephrase that. When my initial reaction to a situation is whatever, shut up, you're not even that good, I'm better than that. If my initial emotional reaction is that, it makes me feel gross. Like I feel less motivated. I just feel like, what is the point to this? If bullshit like this can sell, why am I still down at the bottom, right? That's my point, is when that happens, not only does it feel really bad to feel that way, but where is that coming from? And I have to purposefully switch my mindset and go, wait a minute, if this can sell, I can sell, right? And that's a whole different thought process and a whole different emotional reaction that I have to cultivate, because it's terrible to admit about yourself, but my natural reaction, probably from spending years as a gifted kid, right, is to be like, well, I should be able to, well, how come I can't? I'm good at stuff, right? Which is like, please don't cultivate that in your children, guys. It does not help us as adults. But that's if that's not my reaction, I have to purposefully go and cultivate the other reaction and go, well, this obviously is selling well. That means I can too. I have to work for that feeling. It doesn't happen naturally.
So maybe Matt question, then follow up, since Matt's our mindset guru. Because I definitely I have moved from that bitterness and kind of jealousy feeling when I was much younger to now I am excited, and it had to be a process. But if you asked me to explain what that process was, aside from just repeating it to myself for years, I couldn't really put a finger on it. But I mean, Matt, if you're trying to unlearn something, within your understanding of general mind goo, how would you approach that in completely unlearning and relearning a new mindset like that?
I don't necessarily think it's unlearning a mindset that you have. It's evolving the one that you have, right? So you went from a place of entitlement to confidence, right? And that comes with nothing but experience. So if you're going from 16 to 30, and this is me assuming you're 30, you could be 27. I have no idea how old you are.
I'll take 27. Let's go with that.
Okay, cool. So from that journey, right, you hated mom talks, you felt entitled, like I'm the one that's supposed to be getting these photos. And through experience and working on the craft, you kind of get to this point where that doesn't bother you anymore, and you've accepted that, right? And so a lot of it is emotional maturity, which isn't necessarily relegated to just being in the discipline. It's everything else that you're experiencing. It's life, it's partners, it's kids, it's jobs, right? All of that starts to evolve your emotional maturity. So I think where you're getting at is, it's not unlearning a mindset. It's being aware enough of the mindset that you have and understanding your level of experience, what that brings you. And oh yeah, no, Kat, I know that you're going to add on in just a sec. I get that. I'm trying to get all my shit out before it gets totally ravaged and added on to by Kat. So the point that I'm getting at, for me, right, everything that Nicole was just talking about, I've lived, right, 100%. And it wasn't until I started looking at myself honestly and saying, is my work that good? Am I one of the good people out here? Or is this the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I'm so ignorant about what I know that I think I'm way better than I am? And what happens is I start to look at saying, all right, well, what makes it good? Who's making the comparison? Why do I feel the need for comparison? I just keep asking myself questions. And what happens over time is that mindset shifts into one more of confidence in just who you are and what you are, rather than feeling entitled to something that somebody else has. So it's not unlearning, you're learning that process, and it's just evolving. I don't know if that answers the question, but I don't like to think that we have to shift everything that we think. I think we just have to look at it differently, reframe it like Nicole does. So, Kat, what were you going to add?
Well, I like the reframe. And the thing for me is, once I know that I do need to check myself, right? Like, oh, I didn't even realize that these were negative thoughts that I was having. That's just the way I've always been, right? Like, because you fall into habit. Like your thoughts are nothing but habits. You have the same, like 90% of your thoughts throughout the day statistically are the same thoughts you had yesterday, right? But when I'm self-aware enough, like you were saying, like sort of police yourself a little bit to hear and or feel those negative thoughts coming up, I will literally stop, cancel. Like I'll say it out loud in the middle of the fucking grocery store, like cancel, change, whatever, right? So that I am, and this is where those Dispenza books come into play, is I'm rewiring my brain to think differently from a physical space because I'm changing that habit. And that's the fastest way from like A to X, to condense time and space to allow myself to, you know, learn and think differently.
And that's the pattern interrupt that Tony Robbins talks about, right?
Yep.
Joe Dispenza's, and he's realigning neural pathways, right? Creating new roads. And I think that is really the essence of it, of just being with yourself enough to ask the questions. All right, where is it coming from? If I did look at this differently, how do I feel about that? But when you get to a point, Kat, like you were saying, when you can notice it and be like, no, that's not right, or that's not aligned with where I am now, and that's an invasive thought that I don't need and I want to change. If you can recognize it in the moment, it's so incredibly powerful to changing that habit over and over and over. But it's a lot of work. It's not easy to have that radio station on all the time.
I'm going to grab something that David used to say and kind of bring the conversation right back around and see if we can close with this. But sometimes we have to not ask ourselves, does it feel good to feel this way, but is it useful, right? And so if those feelings were useful, then we could live with them and lean into them and, okay, how do I use this, right? So sometimes righteous anger is a proper and useful response to a situation. Sometimes it's just self-harming. And so we have to ask ourselves, when we start feeling that way, is it useful? And if my response to seeing other artists succeed in my space is to be angry and defensive and territorial, is that a useful feeling? No, because I cannot change the fact that they're there. I cannot alter the landscape of my profession. I cannot do anything with that. So it's not even does it make me feel bad, but it's not useful, right? But if I start changing my mindset to, yeah, here comes another one, like go photographer, go writers, grow, we're taking over everything. Yeah, look at us go. We can succeed. If I look at everybody else's success as just proof that I can get there, is that a useful feeling? Yeah, because it means that now when I see those other authors succeed, I don't have to wallow in self-pity because that's not me. I feel motivated to chase them now because I know it can be done. So even if we're to just look at it from a perspective of, is it even a useful thing to ruminate on? And I'm not going to say to feel, because there's no morality in your feelings, right? Your feelings show up like the clouds in the sky, and you can either watch them pass and go, oh, there goes that feeling, and let it go and go about your day, or you can grab it and hold on to it and ruminate. And if you've never, ruminant is an animal. A ruminant is an animal like a cow, okay? They have 4 stomachs, right? They eat roughage, and then they burp it back up and chew it more and burp it back. They are ruminating. When you ruminate on an emotion or an idea, you are vomiting it back up and chewing on it again. So if you have a negative and useless feeling or emotion show up in your life and you ruminate on it, you're just making yourself chew the cud over and over and over again. And if it's not useful, then you're not only wasting your time, but you're choosing to wallow around in something that doesn't feel good. And why would you do that?
And here's the other piece of the puzzle. Your brain doesn't know the difference. Right?
Yep.
Your brain doesn't know that you're reliving something or just revisiting. Right? As far as your brain is concerned, it is happening now.
You're re-traumatizing yourself over and over and over again.
Over and over and over. So, like, that's going to make PTSD look real different. real different, right? When it's by choice, like that trauma that not only occurred to you, right, but that you consistently cycle through until you just fucking deal with it and take a look at whether or not it's useful and why it's there, and whether or not you're going to choose to make that same decision to go down that same rabbit hole again and again. Brains.
I know.
I love them.
Well,
I
that
had no
brings us-
idea. I had no idea the etymology of ruminate, and
Yeah.
now, like, whenever I have Chinese food, I'm just gonna be like, just ruminating on the feeling of this just a little bit.
Gonna relive it
Yeah.
again and again, huh,
I'm just gonna
Matt?
relive it for the next 6 hours.
yeah, it's wild. Which is why I said it, because I remember when I learned. I don't remember when or how I learned about ruminants. I think somebody had mentioned cows as ruminant animals, and I was like, wait a minute, to go look into that. But it makes but it makes perfect sense, right? When you can't digest something, you vomit it up to chew it again until you can digest it. The problem is, should you be eating it in the first place? And that's the question that we have to ask. When those feelings show up, is this something I should be keeping around? Like, let me look at it long enough to go, okay, I see where that came from. I understand why I'm feeling that way. I don't need to stay there. So we'll let it pass. I'm not going to grab that and try to eat it and then vomit it up over and over again because I never should have had it in the first place. Anyway, that's interesting. Big thanks to everybody who was here today, hanging out with us in the comments, Olga and Amy and Divine and our friends in Facebook land that I didn't get to see your name. So glad you guys were here with us on this Halloween. I hope you guys have an amazing holiday if you celebrate. And if you don't, I hope you go and make something amazing. Any final thoughts from the rest of the Artist Forge crew today?
No, this is great. I like this conversation.
Halloween!
All right, y'all. Well, until this, is it this? No, you guys, it's next Thursday. Okay. So until next Monday and then Thursday, have a fantastic weekend. Divine, we're so glad that you were with us. We love you guys back. Go make something amazing this week, and we will see you next week on the Artist Forge Live. Bye, everybody.